we'll start over again with the Conservatives with Mr. Lloyd. 5 minutes, please go ahead.
Thank you for all being here. My first question is we've long had an issue with contraband tobacco in this country. Wouldn't you agree? Like, is contraband tobacco a significant issue that CBSA and the RCMP deals with?
I would agree, still an issue. Yep.
Do you see an overlap between like organized crime in the tobacco trade, contraband tobacco trade, and the fentanyl trade? Is there a strong connection there, or is there no connection at all?
I'm not aware of any connection. But what I will say is when organized crime are involved, if there's a way to move commodities or a substance or anything, they will use the routes that are already pre-established.
So what you're saying is you don't have evidence before you today to say that the groups that are doing it are the same, but that they're using the same supply chain networks to move their product over the borders.
That's a possibility.
So would you say that if we were to aggressively crack down on contraband tobacco, that we would also see benefits in terms of breaking up the supply chain for fentanyl and other drugs, smuggled guns, for example, human smuggling across the border? Do you think there's a potential?
It could have an immediate impact, but as someone mentioned earlier, organized crime will adjust based on legislation and how we operate.
And of course, I know funding is always an issue. We're in tight economic times, and does the Canadian government and provincial governments lose a significant amount of money on contraband tobacco every year?
I wouldn't have the exact numbers, but one can assume that they're losing money.
And if we were to crack down on that, perhaps we could get the revenues and the funding needed so that we could crack down on the fentanyl trade and the drug trade. Do you have any evidence of what organized crime is using the revenues, the profits they get from contraband tobacco? What are those profits being reinvested into?
It's the way of life. It's how they make the money. They get richer by bringing contraband or illicit substances or firearms or human smuggling, and they just reinvest.
So the revenues from the contraband tobacco trade are also leading to the drug trade, the firearms trade, the human trafficking trade. There's a connection there.
Well, as I said, if you look at organized crime, they're involved where anywhere they can make a money, somebody.
Okay. So there is a strong connection. We just recently finished up with our long auto study, and we've heard time and time again that stolen vehicles from Canada that are being exported abroad through our ports are being used to finance terrorist organizations around the world. They're being used to finance the purchase of smuggled firearms into our country. This is a very serious issue. Clearly, our ports are the weak point here. Does the CBSA have any recommendations for things that we can adopt to strengthen our ports so that we can not only, protect Canadians from the drug trade, but also give our American and other trading allies and partners assurances that Canada's taking the necessary action to protect them?
So, from the CBSA perspective, we work extremely collaboratively with our port authorities, and you did mention stolen vehicles, and the Port of Montreal in particular, where we've seen the highest volume, has been an excellent partner and has been taking their own initiative on how they can further stop the contraband coming into their ports. The more containers we look at, the slower things go. So
they're coming through the Port of Vancouver, I would assume, given that seems logistically to make more sense. What are we doing to intercept those shipments coming into Canada? How can we strengthen our ports to block those?
So I don't want to speak on behalf of the ports. The work that we do in terms of inspecting and interdicting precursors and other contraband coming in through the ports is through a combination of intelligence, targeting information from allies, information that we have received through the many information sharing and collaborative arrangements we have with our policing partners.
Recommendations on how we can strengthen that today? Is there a plan? We've just been, the president-elect of the United States says he's going to put a 25% tariff on us. So do we have a plan to show that we're taking action on this, or are we currently just working on the plan?
So I'll defer to the minister's remarks yesterday about the plan that was consulted with the provinces and that he has indicated, as has the Prime Minister, that they will talk to the Americans.
So there is a plan?
Your question on the ports, one issue with CBSA is ports are required to provide us space to do our examinations for imports. They're not required to provide us space for exports. That being said, we haven't run into ports that are resistant to providing us that space, but that's an area where there's a bit of a legislative gap that we would be interested in considering.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. Mr. Lloyd for 5 minutes.
Thank you. How many, to the RCMP, how many people do you estimate are involved in the production and distribution of fentanyl in Canada? Do you have like a ballpark estimate? Is it 1,000 people? Is it 10,000 people?
I don't have a ballpark figure on it.
So you have no idea how many people could possibly be involved in the fentanyl trade in Canada?
There's a significant group, significant number of organized crime group, but if you're asking me for a specific number, I can't give you a specific number.
How many organized crime groups are involved?
Over 4,000 organized crime groups in Canada, as assessed by the Criminal Intelligence Service Canada.
4,000 individual organized crime groups, all with their own distinct leadership and membership?
That's correct.
That's stunning. Now, we heard during the auto theft study from Ontario Provincial Police that oftentimes when they're catching people in the act of stealing cars or as a result of their investigations, that it's often people that they've already been interacting with, people that they've caught previously. In fact, many of these people were out on bail. Are you finding in your fentanyl investigations, when you're cracking down on these labs and you're having these great busts that we like to see, and you're catching people, are these people that are known to law enforcement generally, or are they people that have had no interaction with law enforcement before?
Go ahead.
I'm happy to take it. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for the question. Yes, it's fair to say that organized crime individuals are not individuals that have been arrested only once. We deal with the same individuals and groups very often.
So you would say that in the majority of cases that the people that you're catching in these things are repeat offenders?
That's fair to say, yeah.
Now, in a previous parliament under this Liberal government, Bill C-5 reduced a number of mandatory minimum penalties, and some of these mandatory minimum penalties were related to drug trafficking and the import and export of drugs. And these Schedule I drugs include fentanyl. So we're seeing, as a result of legislation like this, that people who are involved in this deadly fentanyl trade are getting back out on the streets more quickly, and obviously you guys are catching them again in the act. It's clear that mandatory minimum penalties, by keeping these drug pushers in prison for longer, hopefully acts as a deterrent for them continuing that activity, but at least it takes them off the street. How quickly do you find like the time period between these criminals getting out on bail or getting out on the street that you're catching them? Is it like years, like 10 years later that they're getting caught, or are you finding it's more frequent?
So it'd be speculative on my part as to say when they get back in. They're released, most of the times they're released under strict conditions. Some obey the conditions, some don't obey the conditions. And to put a specific timeline as to when they get back involved in organized crime is hard to put a quantified number.
But it wouldn't be a huge amount of time. We could be talking in some cases days, some cases months, maybe in some cases years, but certainly there's a wide spectrum of cases.
I would agree that there's a wide spectrum, as you covered, from days to years to several years.
Anyways, yeah, because I agree. We could shut down all the labs we want, but if we're not shutting down the people that are setting up the labs, then we're not going to be very effective we need to shut down the people that are involved. What can we do to get these people behind bars so that they're not out there pushing these drugs that are killing members of our communities? What can we do better?
So I would answer, I think there's multiple avenues here. One is how do we stop the precursors or slow the precursors from coming in the country? I do think that we need a strong outreach program to inform the Canadian public of the harm of fentanyl. And the other one is sharing information that is ongoing with law enforcement.
It's killed, I don't want to correct you because I agree with you, but it has killed more people in Canada than died in the Second World War, than Canadians that died in the Second World War, this fentanyl opioid overdose crisis. So I think many Canadians know that this is a deadly epidemic that has killed people in my family. It's killed people in many families across Canada. It's devastating. And I hope that you will get the resources and get the legal backing to be able to continue doing your work and cracking down on these people, because we cannot allow this to continue. As we've seen with this study, it's now costing us our international reputation, and so I support you in the work you're doing, and I only hope that you get all the tools that you need to get that job done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. And I'll just follow up because I don't believe you answered this question, Commissioner, so just using my chair's prerogative. Would stiffer penalties for drug traffickers and importers be an effective tool to combat this issue?
I would say it's one tool to combat the issue, stiffer penalties for sure.
Thank you. Appreciate that.